And if there's no objections, would like to move give me 1 second. BL 2017-983 to the start of the agenda. Is there any objections? It's the bill on second reading, Bill 2017-983. If there's no objections by the committee members, we'd like to take this first on the agenda.
What's the purpose of doing it?
At the sponsor's request.
People here No, I'm wondering why are we doing it?
Seeing no opposition. BL 2017-983 sponsors Anthony Davis, Bettany, and others amends the Metro Code to require information for the assessment of economic and community development incentives. Is there a motion? Did you have an amendment on this? You want to move the amendment? Or are you going to hit your button? Councilman Davis.
Sorry about that, Chair, and thank you, and I apologize. I have to leave a little early, so I appreciate the latitude there. Yes, if we can move the amendment, and I will help explain the amendment and have Mr. Jamison help me explain.
Thank you so much, Councilman. The amendment has been moved. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. Councilman Pulley, do you have a question on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment? Okay. The bill, okay, so it's been moved and properly seconded. The amendment, all in favor? Opposed? Amendment passes. Now we're on the bill as amended.
Okay, I will move as amended. I apologize. I was going to explain the amendment, but I'll go ahead and move as amended. If there's a second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Great.
Are you going to go ahead and explain the amendment?
Yes, please. Sorry. So the amendment, obviously, we've been, hopefully you guys got my letter, and it's copies on your desk. We also put a copy of sort of what this would look like in that letter, just a sample questionnaire, report card kind of thing. First, with the amendment, we, had a couple weeks here to go over it. I met again with Matt's office, the ECD office in Ashford. My goal with the amendment was to try and just ensure this wasn't going to be cumbersome or something burdensome on them, first and foremost. Second, the companies that are applying for grants and pilot programs. So I feel like that's what we've accomplished here. We tweaked some of the language. I'll let Mr. Jamison maybe help walk us through kind of what we tweaked. But the biggest things were making sure that, if we're asking for information of the company, and if there's a construction development, for example, obviously we're asking for information from that contractor, but we're not asking for information from every contractor that applicant company has ever used, was one of the things we needed to tweak. There were just some things that weren't clear. So if you want to walk us through, Mike, and we can talk about the amendment first.
Certainly. The agreement in Section A, as amended, would clarify a few grammatical preferences. Instead of constantly referring to payment in lieu of taxes, it would refer to pilot incentives. Then the last section in that Section A would make clear that only Metro grants through 2.210 are those that are conditioned on the annual appropriation by the council, but not pilots. Subsection B, as amended, adds transparency as a grounds for the essentially the report card that would be provided. Also provides the same abbreviations for pilot and ECD, which was not previously elaborated upon. Otherwise, that section is originally drafted and is now amended. States that to allow assessments by the council, the ECD would solicit a project proposal that has specific pieces of information, specifically the type of number of jobs to be provided, whether they are temporary and permanent or permanent, the number to be filled by Davidson County residents. It would also require a workforce plan, which would further distinguish between whether the jobs are those relying on temporary or staffing agencies, whether or not the employees would be employed by the actual incentivized company or contractors or subcontractors, the wages and benefits to be offered and how they compare to the local average wages. There would also be a report regarding the use of apprentices, a program, and whether or not that program is certified by the U.S. Department of Labor. There are apparently about 30 such programs that may or may not be certified by the Department of Labor, 30 of which are certified. The report also requires what was originally 5 years of information regarding previous OSHA or TOSHA violations, and also any involvement in wage and hour legislation or wage litigation, That is now by the amendment increased to 7 years. It does clarify, as Councilman Davis made clear, that the information along these lines that is sought from the company's contractor or subcontractors are only those contractors or subcontractors that are on this particular project, not in its previous history. The amendment also adds that these reports are provided sort of up front before the council votes, but then on an ongoing basis, along with any other required reports under Title II of the Code. Lastly, in subsection C, it provides that quarterly reports after the incentive is voted upon would be provided, and that those reports, there's a reference in the original to a certificate of compliance. This makes clear it's now just a report of compliance. Reports for the grants would be provided on an annual basis, and the most significant change, I think, is that those reports could be the basis for this council to determine in its discretion, it is not mandatory, but solely with respect to the Metro grants, not the pilots, the council would have the discretion to suspend or terminate the incentive if thresholds had not been met.
And just to clarify that last point, Mike, because that was, obviously we got the chamber letter today. I feel like I hopefully responded well in the letter back, but pilots, we made it very clear we're not taking any power away from the IDB if we were to ever rescind a pilot, not that we ever would. And number two, the jobs grants is something we created, so we already had that power. Is that correct?
Jobs grants was created under Section 2.210 of the Metro Code. The pilot is a state-enabled creation, and it is funneled through the IDB. And there was concern about, in the original draft, how this changes the process and essentially the jurisdiction of the IDB. This makes clear that the only termination or suspension action can only be applied to the Metro grants, those under Section 2.210.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Council Lady Allen.
Thank you. I should remember exactly what those grants were. Can you explain again, are those the small business grants and the criteria that
essentially the $500 per job grant?
For small businesses that meet?
That's a separate section, but yes, you're in the correct section.
Okay, and so you're saying that's the only piece that we're requiring the quarterly reports for which we would potentially stop that grant program?
The only thing that the council would retain the power to then suspend or terminate an incentive are those Metro grants, but not for the pilots.
And so everything else is simply informational?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's important to know. So we're not giving us any more influence or political input necessarily than is currently there, except for these small business grants that we created and have the power to do in the first place.
I mean, depending on what you mean by political influence. So this, as drafted and as amended, this council would still get information on pilots. And so a company that was granted and signed a pilot agreement, let's say it does not meet its threshold. As amended, you're still getting that information. And maybe this body submits that to the IDB, but this body would not take any punitive action against the company that receives pilots for failing to meet those thresholds.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask Mr. Wiltshire, I know you worked with the councilman on this amendment to make it something that you're more comfortable with. Do you feel like we've gotten to a good place? Does this leave you able to negotiate, or do we still have work to do?
First of all, greatly appreciate Councilman Davis introducing this legislation and the support for it. I think that, first off, the mayor is strongly in favor of transparency and of accountability. We have introduced both transparency and an accountability to each of the pieces of legislation that we have brought to this council, and we've sought to do that and solicited input from you all about what additional information you would like to see. And in every project, we understand you all are the ones who ultimately decide whether to approve that or not, and we'll talk about Phillips in just a moment on that front. I think these are really complicated things to put into force and effect. I think the latest change to the amendment package, which is to remove pilots from this sort of rescission issue, does address a serious legal concern they had. The short answer is we will work with whatever rules this body puts in front of us, and we will continue to work for economic development. I think the legislation as drafted is not maybe exactly as I would have wanted it to be drafted, but that's part of what the public discussion and compromise results in. And so I think that's a long way of saying it's probably not exactly as I would have drafted it, but we can certainly make it work, and we will work to improve the legislation that we bring before you by integrating the priorities that this body has said are important to it into each piece of legislation that we receive. And so there's this sort of overarching framework, but then there's going to be a specific pilot that we bring to you, and that pilot in and of itself will be one that you all will have to say, does it meet the terms that we're looking for or not? And so we'll certainly seek to do that. And we've done that already. We heard from you that MTA and Yeezy Rider programs were a priority, and as you'll hear later on, Phillips has stepped up and said, look, we're making that a #1 priority for us. So we'll continue to do that.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Wilshire, I'm going to ask you to,
yes, sir.
Let's go through a couple of things. First of all, I don't think we do have the transparency we need, all right?
Okay.
And I think you and I have had this conversation, and so let me be very transparent on that. We are not as transparent as we should be. The thing that concerns me about this, and that's why I was asking why are we bumping it up, and what are we doing here? If a deal is negotiated with a company on behalf of the administration, and then it comes to the council, and if things change radically in that deal, what does it do to compromise that or perhaps derail that particular deal?
You're saying if we negotiate with a company and sort of come to a handshake, and then a whole set of new provisions come in after that fact, how does that impact the process?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking? That would be extraordinarily problematic. A, because the company itself then on that specific process may have some changes and, would have to adjust. It's like, rebuilding a plane mid-flight. But the more problematic piece of that even would be for every subsequent deal that we attempted to negotiate on behalf of this body, I would suggest that every counterparty would have in the back of its mind, well, gosh, I saw what happened when those guys put a proposal forward. The deal changed radically, and so the expectations or demands from the other party in that negotiation might be much higher because they would be fearful that their deal would be renegotiated after it hit the floor.
Okay, so
that's a lot of supposition, but
right. So I'm going to ask you this question on behalf of the administration as far as their view upon this particular bill and the amendment therein. If a deal is struck and there is, supposed to be 500 jobs or 400 jobs or whatever the number happens to be that triggers the $500 per person on the tax credit, if they missed it by 3%, does this bill, in your opinion, require everything be paid back, or is there a fail-safe, I guess, in the provision in the amendment piece? And forgive me, I read the analysis over the weekend. I did not read the amendment today.
Yeah, so I think the first good thing of the first amendment was that previously the bill said, if you miss this, let's call it a report card. That's not what it is. But if you miss any of the terms in the report card, the council shall at its discretion. That was a little bit confusing because it's at its discretion, but also shall at its discretion vote to rescind the agreement. I thought that was problematic and a disproportionate response, right? In part because what this bill is asking a company to do is to predict the number of employees that it will hire that will be residents of Davidson County. And I mean, look, I certainly understand why the council is interested in that question. I'm not negotiating that. I'm not debating that on the floor, but I think it's fair that Phillips, who's going to hire 815 people and hasn't been operating this function in this marketplace, for them to know with certainty we're going to have 685 of our employees be Davidson County residents, or 212 be Davidson County residents. That's an unrealistic expectation for them to know that with any certainty in advance of any of the hiring. And so having it in there is saying, and so you missed that, you're out. I would counsel any company, go low, right? So, but then the problem is companies are coming forward and saying, look, we're only going to hire 200 of the 815 residents are going to be Davidson County employees. And you guys are rightfully going to say, well, then what the heck are we doing, you know, if we're only 200? And so you just get in this weird situation. I think the fact that the council has discretion is good, and it says may and not shall, but I do think it certainly adds some uncertainty to companies.
So let me press you on a couple of things, if I may. The deals we've done over the last 6 years, are you able to show us in dollars and cents exactly what we've accomplished with those deals? Can you give us the not only the number of jobs that have been created, but also kind of the I'm going to call it sideline effects, the sales tax dollars that have been spent in the restaurants, the things that have occurred downtown when they go to eat lunch, when they do these things, when they do the various, even though they may not live in Davidson County. Are you able to give us something that we can actually sink our teeth into and absorb those numbers and determine that, okay, overall this does make sense, or maybe it doesn't make sense to do it?
Yes. So I've distributed previously to this body a spreadsheet of each of the deals that have been done, jobs that were expected to be added, jobs that were actually added, and we're now, and I may be sort of making news here, we've finally gotten that posted now to our website, and we'll send around a link. It's being scrubbed right now, but that information's publicly available. And
yeah, but I'm talking about as far as the economic impact on sales tax dollars and things. Can we go down a little deeper?
That would require us to do some work. I cannot today, only because, I mean, to do an economic impact analysis like that, I think would require. But
don't we do that on the front end of everything that we're asking us to vote on and asking us to do? We say this is what the economic impact is going to be, and let me just say the Major League Soccer. We're saying this is what's going to happen. Do we have anything that backs that up?
Yes, we go back to double check the input numbers, but I don't want to overstate what I can do, Councilman. I don't want to say like I've gone through and like tied specific sales tax is collected to this, you know, this job project, but certainly both from a number of jobs actually added, the wages of those jobs, et cetera, we do have all of that information, and I could certainly perform some of that analysis for you.
Okay, well, and Chair, thank you for indulging me. I think it would be important if you're going to tell us, sitting here in this chamber, that if we do this deal, it's going to mean this to us. I think we have enough history now that we should be able to tell us this is what it's actually done for us versus what we think it could do for us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Poley.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a couple of questions to play off what's already been asked. Mr. Jameson or Mr. Cooper, does this apply, or is any language in there that addresses whether or not this would apply retroactively to pilots that currently exist?
I would submit no, it certainly was not, and I don't want to speak for the sponsor. I'll let him confirm this. That was not his intent. There was never an intent to go back to any existing deals. And if you think through the way this process now works, an applicant company would be required to provide initial information on the front end. So for previous existing deals, that provision doesn't exist and it would not apply to them. There was also a concern that this was intended in some way to apply to Phillips. It was not intended. I believe the sponsor will confirm that. It was not intended to apply neither retroactively nor to anything you were considering concurrently.
I don't believe it was intended to be that way. I just want to ensure that the language is such that we don't fall into any kind of trap that makes it retroactive in any way, and I just want you to be able to address that. Mr. Cooper, would you have any comment on that?
I agree. There's no language in there that specifies one way or the other. A logical reading of it is that the intent would be for it to apply prospectively. As Mr. Jameson said, you're talking about applicants for these incentives submitting this information. If the council did determine that that a report that was received from a previous deal, if they didn't feel that they were meeting their what they had said they were going to do and tried to terminate that incentive agreement, that could pose potential breach of contract issue. But the sponsor has stated that that is not the intent to apply to any deal that has already been negotiated and is in effect at this point.
Okay, all right, thank you. With respect to the number and type of construction-related jobs, the information that's asked on the front end of this, clearly they would be estimates. Is that anything different than people are normally putting forth to us in these kinds of agreements? I guess the question is designed to get at, are we trapping them into anything that they can't get out of here? I don't necessarily think that's the case, but I'd love to have you comment on that.
Mr. Wiltshire, you'll address that?
Yes, certainly I don't think there's practically speaking, we're going to have to see how all of these things play out in reality. There is there's a certain law of unintended consequences that comes up, and we're very aware of that. And so I don't think there's any intent. There may be something that comes up that we hadn't anticipated. If there is, we'll bring it to this body's attention and work to resolve it. But I'm not aware of any.
Okay, all right. And I suppose you would be the appropriate person to ask this, but I think it's kind of been somewhat asked already. But I just want to make sure that we're not de-incentivizing companies with this bill who may go elsewhere because of the things that scare them away about this. And I guess I would frame that as, do we have other cities who have comparable ordinances we have looked at before diving into this? And maybe you or the sponsor could address that.
Yeah, so look, I guess I would first start out by saying anytime you put additional obligations onto companies in exchange for benefits that they receive, that makes it less likely that they would do it. That's just a truism, right? If you say to someone, I'm going to give you $100, no strings attached, or I'm going to give you $100, but I need these 10 things from you, the $100, no strings attached, of course, is going to be more attractive. So I think that's just true. But in all of these things, there are balances that we have to consider. And the interest of this body to receive information or to obligate the recipients of those funds are things that we have to balance. And I think that's what this body needs to consider. In a couple of instances, we have already required certain obligations of companies to set a 20% DBE goal participation on construction, to contact MTA and make Easy Rider available to their employees. And this body has made those requirements as a part of the trade-off, and we do that. I think, at some point, if you layer so many requirements onto a company, then those companies will no longer find those things attractive. That's just a reality of it. I would say, as a broader macroeconomic statement, I was, for the first few years that I was in this role, extraordinarily aggressive about trying to not require a lot of other things onto these bills. We added accountability provisions, right? If you don't deliver what you say you're going to deliver, you don't get the benefit that you were promised. And those are very clear and have been in place for a long time. But in terms of adding other things, those strings attached, I was really honestly against those, because I think when you're competing for jobs aggressively, having lots of strings attached makes it tougher to do deals. In an environment where Nashville is in the position that it's in today, I think it's more appropriate. This is y'all's judgment. I don't mean to take, it would be my advice that it's more appropriate to acquire more strings from the recipients of these incentives, because we're in a position to be able to demand that. I would suggest to you that if unemployment goes back up to 9%, this body ought to consider streamlining those things. But in the current macro environment, certainly I think it absolutely makes sense to require more strings attached, because that's what the macroeconomic conditions and the overall environment of the city would seem to justify, in my humble opinion.
Given the fact that the estimates are we're going to have way more jobs and we'll have workers to fill them in years to come, I just have a little bit of concern about putting constraints on people that may send them elsewhere. So you could comment on that.
Thank you.
One other question, and I'll leave it for the rest, is I had a constituent a little bit concerned about this. And Matt, maybe you can address this. Mike, you can address this. But is there anything informationally where we are requiring of people that would be close to proprietary in any way, shape, or form that would concern individuals who are applying about losing a competitive edge by the information that they're having to disclose when they have to disclose it?
Yeah, I mean, arguably, I would think the wage rates would be the one thing that would be of most concern in terms of disclosing, I don't want to say proprietary information, but, you know, let's take Phillips as an example, since they're here. If Phillips is disclosing to this body that they're going to pay systems analysts, you know, $64,000 a year, and HCA has that information, and HCA can say, well, if we up it to $65,000, then we can go poach all their people. I mean, I think there's fairly clear transparency on wages, and people post wages on job recruiting boards, so I don't think it's overly onerous. Maybe I don't want to drag Phillips to this, but I mean, I think companies may have some concern about what they're paying for specific wages for specific jobs. But I do think that there is a provision in the bill. We're not going to get down to an individual job. I think it is the intent of the sponsor to try and, when we present this information to you, not list out for the 815 jobs that Phillips is hiring for, here are the specific requirements for those jobs and the specific wages for those jobs, but rather group them into categories of 5 or, you know, 6, some reasonable number that sort of segments them and then provides average wages. It's not one overall number, but it's not 815 overall numbers either. And so with that sort of more aggregated data, that concern about disclosing information that might put you at a competitive disadvantage is somewhat diminished. Other than that, I'm not aware of anything.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Chair. That's enough.
Thank you, Mr. Wiltshire. Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. Sorry, I was in a little side conversation. So I'm not on the sponsor list, and I'm not gonna lay down my political life over this. However, I do think that this is sort of a funky way to run a railroad. Sort of built into the premise of this is that we don't like how the results are coming out of how the administration or maybe successive administrations run these things, and we'd rather create a 40-person police force looking over quarterly reports and making decisions about deals sort of after the fact. My preference structurally is that, we get these things one at a time. We get detailed contracts. For the Phillips one, which we've talked about a few times today, like the ones before it, are 7, 8, 9-page contracts that have pretty detailed information about what has to happen and what the triggers, what the pullbacks are. And, my preference would be that we, as a body, show diligence, as we have during this term, certainly in making sure that the triggers and the requirements in the contract are appropriate. That way, the parties that we're doing business with have a clear understanding of their rights and obligations, rather than having sort of a overhang of, if I miss a target by 5%, is the council going to be in a bad mood that quarter and pull my incentive? And so, like several people have mentioned, I really deeply appreciate where this is coming from philosophically. I filed and we've passed multiple pieces of financial transparency legislation, so I like that part of it, but I get a little hung up on installing 40-person police force with quarterly reporting to decide after the fact whether missing by 1% is bad enough, or 10% or 50% in order to trigger the undoing of a incentive. So I think I'm going to respectfully be a no on this, or ask that it be deferred so we could work out the details a little bit better. I'm just somewhat uncomfortable with the procedure that we're setting up here. But I do appreciate the sponsor and the administration for working on trying to get this, this important piece of transparency into how we do business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just quickly wanted to thank the bill sponsor for his hard work and his effort to safeguard the public interest. And just to say, if you take public money, there should be accountability and disclosure. If you take public money, there should be accountability and disclosure. Thank you. Thank you to the sponsor and the administration for working so hard on this.
Thank you, Councilman Cooper. Councilman Batney.
Thank you, Chair. Did anybody close on a home purchase lately? You see that stack of paper that you guys need to sign off on? That's a big stack of paper. You buy the house anyway. You probably don't read the whole thing, but there's all these disclosures and all that information there. To say that because we're asking for a little bit less than information that a closing on a residential purchase is going to kill a deal, I think it's a little bit an exaggeration. We were all elected on I was elected on my second term on a wave of people asking for more transparency on how we spend the city's money. And I give credit to the administration for having gone that way, but we also have a responsibility. If we are going to say that we are not going to accept that responsibility, then we should basically just do a rubber stamp with our signature and give it to somebody else, maybe to the chamber or to the mayor's office, to stamp on all these legislations so they can approve them without our input. What I'm asking here is that we get information in a way that is repetitive, in a way boring, as something that an architect can look at and understand, a report card that will tell me this is what you're getting with this incentive package, and then I can actually decide if that is what my constituency really want. That's something that I can share with people in Nashville that are perhaps not accountant lawyers or financiers. They're just people that maybe work on a bakery or something like that, and they can look at the report card and decide if that's really a good deal or not. So that's all I'm asking, to have that information in a way that is objective, transparent, simple, and it can help us get that feedback we need. I'm a sucker for feedback. I ask people for feedback quite a bit. I need to be able to share that information to people. So going back, we all signed contracts that have many more papers, and we actually pay for it. We didn't get free money like Mr. Wilshire was saying. It was actually something we pay for, and we signed probably checking half the paper. So I don't see why asking to get a one report card telling us what's on a deal is going to kill the deal. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilman. Council Lady Gilmore.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I had co-sponsored the bill as well, and I was just trying to make sure I hadn't missed anything. It's just simply a report card. And we get a report card. Matter of fact, the chamber gives us a report card. Some of the people in this room probably got Fs if they didn't know it or not, according to the chamber. So I see nothing wrong with it. I think everybody has to be measured. I think as Councilmember Cooper shared, you know, we're giving away public money. We're not giving, we're essentially saying, yes, you can do business with us, and our constituents have brought this to us. Moreover, People are concerned in the community. Everybody says that Nashville's doing really good, but there are people that are being left behind. And this is a way to make sure that we are holding those companies accountable. And yes, we do have DBE goals, but we have not made them. So at this point, we can say that we require these things from companies, but for whatever reason, we're still not meeting those metrics. So I think having this report card is a good thing. Constituents are looking, more people are becoming more involved. This is a way to be transparent and open to say, if we are giving you this money as a city, where are you creating those jobs? Are you being accountable as it relates to DBE? What are you doing to OSHA standards? People have gotten killed, employees have gotten killed over the last couple of years. We know that there's a lot of firms that hire out and they do kind of low wage type of things. They'll make sure that people have the proper equipment. So this is what it's saying. So I see nothing wrong with it. I encourage my other colleagues to support that. And remember, you have a report card too. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Davis. Scott Davis.
Thank you, Madam President. I admire both the sponsors of this bill, their hard work on this. Now, Mr. Jameson, I have a question for you. Now, before everybody gets upset, Mr. Davis, I'm asking buying questions. We understand what that means.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Can we, if we were able to suspend the rules, could we add a sunset provision?
This is a bill in Rule 15 that would be called an economic development ordinance or resolution. So those are the rare types of bills, in addition to zoning bills, that you can amend on third reading. So no need to suspend the rules. You could submit that amendment for consideration if this goes to third reading on January 2nd, for example.
So if need be, because, you know, one side says, hey, we like it, but we want till February to fix it. One side says we need it now. So hypothetically, if we added a sunset provision, so right after January, whenever it sunsets, and we can revisit this so that the business community and labor can get back together and hatch this out and get those minor tweaks and just make his bill even the most perfect bill in history. That could happen.
Yes, sir. In fact, this council and previous councils have done that on occasion, and typically what you'll do is you'll pick a period of time that gives you sufficient data to analyze, a year or two, for example. You probably don't want to do it in the midst of midterm elections, and you also probably want, within that provision, you'll set out that this is intended for the council to have time to study its impact, and you can list the criteria and then allow the bill, if the council decides it likes it, allow them to implement it more permanently simply by resolution. But those are all options.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Jameson.
Thank you, Councilman. Council Lady Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two things, and I have had a request from the chamber if we could, when we do vote on this, have a roll call vote, so I just want to go ahead and get that on the record before I forget. And secondly, I'm a co-sponsor of this, and I appreciate everything Councilmember Davis has done. I feel like that we are close to having something that everybody feels good about, but not quite there, and maybe I'm picking up on Councilmember Mendez's statement about deferring just to have one more conversation with everybody in the room as opposed to maybe just Councilmember Davis and Matt Wiltshire channeling everybody in the room. So I think that might be an official motion to defer just so, because I'm not sure we're going to have a good opportunity to get together between now and January 2nd to talk about amendments, just looking in reality of what all the fun things that are going on between now and January 2nd.
Council Lady, before you make that motion, would you like to hear, I was going to circle back around to the sponsors so he could address all those concerns that was stated previously.
Absolutely.
There's been a lot of work that's gone into this bill, but I don't want to speak for the sponsor.
Okay.
Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and I appreciate all the questions, and thank you, Matt Wiltshire, for answering those very well and agreed with plenty of what you said. I did just want to simplify this for everybody. Again, it's just a report card. I think we're I think we've found a good niche here where we're doing something really light. We're avoiding preemption from the state. We're just asking for more information and transparency. Just to simplify it down, I mean, you know, the ECD office only does two kinds of deals, the pilots and the jobs grants. And as was corrected in the amendment, we don't even have the power to rescind a pilot. That is through the Industrial Development Board. The jobs grants maybe is more our thing. But again, I'm not with this bill saying we're ever going to rescind anything. It's just, again, to get more information on the table when the pilots and jobs grants come to us in the first place. And then there would be a quarterly report as well. Some of the questions again, we've outlined for the ECD office, some of the questions are a little more geared towards construction, which, as you've seen, only 1 in maybe 4 or 5 of these even have any construction. It's often, you know, a company that's just moving here and they're bringing jobs, and so it's a jobs grant. We left those companies on there, though, because in the case that maybe it's a manufacturing company, that sort of thing, even for anybody, so we'd want to know if they had any OSHA violations. Just simple information. Doesn't mean we have to say no to them. We can still give the incentive. I mean, I'm all for that. I voted for every single one of these, and I will continue to do so, more than likely. But we would at least have that information. We would know if they had OSHA violations or wage theft. So that's why we left the actual applicant company on there, whereas a lot of those questions, again, if it's construction, is more geared towards that. And I do feel like if it is construction, they're just going to send it to the GC, and they're going to fill the questionnaire out. Matt's office is going to take that, working with Ashford, who we've collaborated with on this. They're going to take it, give us a report card. I mean, that's simple. So again, I think we're complicating it a little bit. I feel like with the amendment, we've answered most of the concerns, and I think the ones that aren't answered, I just don't have an answer for. It's kind of an agree to disagree thing. If I feel like Nashville's red hot, asking for a little more information, now is the time to do it. This is the right time. So it's sort of, if you disagree philosophically with asking for that extra information, you may be a no or an abstention. But if you want the information up front, if you don't mind a quarterly report moving forward, then I think you'll be for it. So I'm not for deferring because I feel like with the amendment, we answered everything I could possibly answer. So if the will of you guys is to recommend deferral, that's fine, but I would ask that we move forward tonight and continue moving forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. We have one more council member in queue. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. So let's go back to, if I may, Mr. Jameson. If we pass this, a lot of times what we do is we interpret and let's go 3 or 4 councils down the road on what we think we did with this bill versus what it may actually do, et cetera. And I know we love to say that we've done all the work. We've worked really hard to get all this stuff finished, but at the end of the day, a lot of times we don't. There's a lot of unintended consequences that happens when we pass bills. So the question is simply this. If we pass this, is there any room whatsoever for the council to come back and say, we're going to take back incentives that we have given, or is there no room at all? I mean, if it's purely a report card, if that's all it is, that's one thing. But if it gives this body the authority 8 years, 12 years, 20 years down the road to say, nope, we're pulling that money back, I guess that's what I'm looking for, because that's the way I translate it. And if I'm wrong, please tell me.
No, so the last section of subsection C does make clear that with respect just to the Metro grants, for example, the $500 per job, not the pilots, but the Metro grants, if benchmarks are not met, this council does have the discretion, it's not required to, but it does have the discretion to suspend or terminate further incentives for that company. So you may have a company that comes back annually for some calculated amount of pay based on the number of jobs. They didn't hit the benchmarks. This council could stop or suspend that.
So then it's not just a report card.
Correct.
Okay, see, this is why I kind of get in the crosshairs on this stuff, because I want to make sure I understand exactly what it is we're talking about. And that's one reason that I guess that I'm going to support the deferral, because if it's a report card, I'm good with that. But it doesn't sound like it is, and that's why I keep pressing the question. If it's a report card, that's one thing. If councils down the road can retract any dealing that we've offered, that's something completely different. And I mean, we've got a lot of issues in front of us right now. I get that. I just don't know that we need to create another firestorm because we got plenty of those we've created on this floor.
Thank you,
Chair.
Councilman. I'm going to go back to the sponsor, Councilman Davis.
Mr. Jameson, couldn't we hold a hearing today, though, if we weren't satisfied with jobs grants and that sort of thing?
Sure.
It's not like we're adding a bunch of power.
But
A little clarification, though, in the code is what we are doing.
But could we retract and say, so in other words, all right, so let's go back to Dale, if I may. Can we now say we're not happy with the Dale deal that was done with the Bredesen administration and say we stop it now? Are we able to do that?
Well, so I think it's important to note that there are two aspects to this. So what you're looking at is a change to the text of the code. But when these incentives are passed, what typically happens is there's a separate agreement that's issued by the administration with our approval. So we would do that with Phillips, for example. If those separate agreements say hard and fast, we're going to have a 5-year period of time where we pay you $500 per job you've created, and the council then comes back and suspends or terminates that, then Phillips could rightfully say, we have a contract and you're in trouble. Theoretically, what happens is if this council changes the code, the agreements reflect the code, and the agreements would henceforth say, in future agreements going forward, you'll have a 5-year deal subject to your compliance with these terms. And if you don't, there's an asterisk because the council has reserved the right to suspend or terminate.
And that's what the amendment and that's what this bill says now.
What the bill says is, yes, the council may in its discretion suspend or terminate, but I would come before this council, the administration would come before this council and say, don't go back retroactively, don't force us into a breach of the agreement. But depending on what the agreement says, which presumably from this point forward, if this is adopted, would make assurances that this council can change the terms of the deal if there's not a performance to the threshold levels. But in terms of going back to pre-existing contracts that don't have that language in there, we would strongly advise the council not to rescind those or terminate.
I get that piece, but what I heard the sponsor saying is we could do that today.
We can rescind any of these approvals. Now, does that mean we're going to go back and cancel the underlying contract? Probably.
I don't think we would, but so I guess then, and Chair, forgive me, but I'll finish with this question. If we already have it in place, we can do it. Why is this necessary? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Jameson.
What this is making clear is that within the text of, this is not in the code now. There's no provision within 2.210 that says, and if you underperform, then we get to rescind this. And presumably the contracts, I think Mr. Wilshire has done a phenomenal job of having those requirements within the contract, but it's not mandated. This would essentially put everyone on notice that those contracts will have those provisions and you can be suspended or terminated in the receipt of your incentives if you underperform.
Council Lady Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Vercher. First, I want to thank the sponsor, Councilman Davis. I fully support the transparency and the scorecard approach that this bill brings. I do have some questions, though, in regard to the suspension and termination and kind of the matter of degree. I feel like while new contracts would be written, and I think that's good. I think it's good that businesses appreciate that they are receiving this incentive and that it can be rescinded in some fashion, but I think, can someone please speak to how this bill, whether that's the sponsor or ECD, just that matter of degree, right? So if you miss your mark on how many people you intended to employ, and you miss that by 15 people, 20 people, I mean, there's a difference in missing by hundreds of people and missing by a smaller number, and how we're going to address that, please.
I'll let the sponsor answer. Councilman Davis.
I would say, largely to be determined in that, again, we're just asking for the information. It's up to us if we ever want to go back and look back at these companies and go, okay, let's hold a hearing on this company. They really are just not performing with their metrics that they said. If they're completely not doing what they said, maybe we could hold a hearing. And with a pilot, we're not able to rescind that. With the jobs grants, we would potentially have the power to rescind. But again, I don't know that it's ever happened before, and they would just have some accountability in that we would have to have a report and we would be able to look at it. I'm not sure, it'd be the will of this body if something were so bad that we really wanted to really take a look at rescinding something, then we would do so.
Thank you, Councilman. Does that answer your question, Council Lady?
Yes, it does to a certain degree, again, but since we're talking about degree, Mr. Jameson, can you speak to the viability? I mean, without kind of getting off into the weeds of all the technicalities, I recognize each contract is unique, but is there a way to address this matter of degree such that kind of the spirit of the bill certainly is, transparency? I do think absolutely we want to have the accountability, but I do become somewhat concerned that just in the general climate or perception that, we as a political body, could pull something back unfairly. Not that we would do that, but just, again, perception. And can you speak to that?
Sure. My best advice in revising a section of a code like this is the more wiggle room you leave for yourself, the better. These will be judged in those cases where a company underperforms and this council decides in its discretion to take it back up to consider what sort of punitive remedial effort to take. If you set specific benchmarks, that's what's going to cause you trouble, because a company that misses a goal by 5% may have few of any excuses, whereas a company that misses it by 50% may have every excuse that's legitimate to this council in the world. If you also set specific percentages of missing a threshold that then kick in implications, then you may have companies that just backdate their projections to anticipate that failure rate. So I would leave as much flexibility in the code and leave it to the council's discretion and future council's discretion as possible.
Understood, and I concur. Mr. Wilshire, can you speak to that? So to the extent that you could have the issue of degree kind of contractually in what you do, I mean, in the spirit of what we're trying to achieve here?
I'm never short of opinion, but I will sort of defer to the council on this one. I think uncertainty is a bad thing. I think clarity is a good thing. Those are just overarching statements. To be perfectly honest, what we're talking about here now is limited to the job grants. And Councilwoman Allen, I heard you say earlier small business grants. Just to be clear, these are for the large business grants. So these are companies that are expected to add 500 or more jobs over 5 years. And as you know, we pay for the jobs we get. There's already accountability built into that. And we only pay for the jobs we get, and we pay for every job we get. It's just inherent in the structure of those deals. What this body is considering is having the right to rescind the deal if they miss, being explicit about it, if they miss the percentage of employees who are residents of Davidson County. That's what this body's talking about doing. That if you produce a report at the outset before you've hired a single person, you're going to hire 815 people, and you tell us 470 of them are going to be Davidson County residents because you think that kind of seems like a reasonable number, or based upon some statistical analysis that you've done, and then you only hire 469, and this council therefore opens up the right to rescind the entire agreement. That seems like an unnecessary step to me. So I am opposed to that specifically, because to me, those things are not the things that this body should be focused on. But in terms of sort of setting benchmarks and standards and thresholds, I think if you're going to have that provision in there that you're retaining the right to just terminate the agreement, I think retaining some flexibility and using your judgment discretion is probably the best thing to do in this situation.
Okay, thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilor Gilmore.
I wanted Mr. Jameson to answer the question. Currently, we could rescind a contract if we wanted to, correct?
The council can. That does not automatically preclude the possibility that the other side of that contract could sue Metro for breach, but yes.
I'm with you. But I guess I feel like some of our colleagues are getting in the weeds, but these are capabilities we currently have now. If we wanted to rescind.
You can rescind the council's approval of a previous resolution or ordinance that authorized the contract, yes.
Right, okay, and so this time, just to clear it up, it's just saying that we have a report card to go with it, a measurement versus just rescinding something. If we choose to, that we have something to actually look and judge it by. And I guess the second question is too, do you know how many times a contract's been rescinded on behalf of the council?
I can't think of any.
It hasn't been any. I guess that's the point. So I think this just gives more accountability. And if we were to do it, I think the process would be so rigorous and tedious that more than likely we would than not. So I think that this is a good starting point just to look and evaluate information and just to hold companies accountable. Everyone's saying that they want transparency, they want jobs for their communities, their districts. This is a way to start doing it. They say they want equal wages, we're progressive, we're this and that. This is a way to look at a report card, and see how to do it. You have the same capabilities now, whether you've used those tools or not. This is just saying that you have a measurement in which to make an informed decision.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Bettany, a different statement from what's already been articulated to the committee.
Yeah. Mr. Jameson.
Yes, sir.
Can we subpoena people?
In the council? The
Yeah.
council does have subpoena power if it approves an investigation. I think that takes a 2/3 vote, but I would have to double check that.
How many times did we subpoena somebody?
Unfortunately, I was foolish enough to request that during the Home Depot, the Evergreen, and it did not get the 2/3. So as far as I know, we have not used that portion of the charter.
But why? If we are so irrational and we get mad at people, why don't we use the subpoena power?
I would defer to your colleagues on that question.
Okay, so I was just making a point that we are a sentient body. We make decisions based on reason, and we are not just going to go and rescind the deal unless we think that there is something there. And I also wanted to say, you guys are assuming that Matt Wilshire will be there forever. I hope he is. He's doing a great job. But if he's not there, we need to have something in place that will preserve what he's been doing. I mean, we already asked somebody to pay money back because they abandoned a deal. So he does put those clawback conditions on the contracts, but he does it one by one. We're just trying to make it a standard. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. First, I just want to clarify with Mr. Jameson, we've got the power to rescind our approval of a contract. That doesn't actually rescind a contract in any way, shape, or form.
Correct.
And we would almost certainly hear from Metro Legal that that is a useless, inane act to rescind approval of a contract that is already approved in the past, right?
I don't know that Mr. Cooper would call us inane, but he would probably convey something to that effect. Yes.
And this is different because it would build in a trigger where we would, under law, actually create a right to rescind.
Correct. My assumption is that contracts, if this were adopted, any contracts executed by the ECD would adjust their terms accordingly so that they are subject to meeting benchmarks. Mr. Wiltshire does, as noted, an excellent job of having clawbacks, having goals. This would codify that requirement.
I'll make one last point, and that is, this discussion has only confirmed what I felt at the beginning, that if we read the 7 to 8 page contracts that we get with these pieces of legislation, we can see what the clawback triggers are, and they have been improving. Maybe there's more improvement to be done, but I think providing that sort of clarity at the front end about rights and obligations gives us all the power we could need to make sure that there's appropriate clawback. And that, that sort of clarity would be better for the people we're trying to bring into the county rather than have a council-created right of rescission hanging over people's heads, even if it's only hypothetical. It's something that they have to take into account. Really, and finally, just to hopefully draw our hour-long conversation to a close. I don't want to see this die. Maybe there's enough votes to get it passed, but I would move to defer.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Pridemore, on the deferral? Or you on the other discussion?
Well, I'm sure I can word it in the way, the fashion of a deferral. I choose to go against voting for the deferral, and one of the main reasons is that in the past 6.5 years, on countless occasions, this body and the previous body, some of the members are here, we discussed contracts with had incentives. And somewhere during that process, normally toward the end of the process, on third reading or the discussion or a question comes up as to specific statistics. I would like to see this. Is this going to happen? Would this happen? It was never in legislative form. It was all in more of, this is the wishes of council members. And I think all we're doing now is these questions that or these statements we made during the time that these contracts were discussed on the floor and eventually approved. All this is doing is putting those questions or those statements that everybody wanted in legislative form, to where now instead of we would like to see this, and then we get a response of you will see this, unless we personally or a group goes back and requests that information, we never see it again. Not saying it's bad. We have a lot on our plates, and we don't. Some things, as time goes by, are not as important as what currently is up. So all I'm saying is what we're requesting now is basically, other than the one little, if you want to call it the enforcement tool, which we've had some of that power and we've yet to use it in my last two council meeting or council tenure. So I see only what we're doing is getting a report card. And a lot of times the wishes of members who have asked and said, I would like to see, I'll give you an example, how many, gender-wise, how many females do you expect to have on this job, and we'd like to see this. Well, that's something that we'll be able to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the recognition. I know I'm not on this committee, but since I am here with my name attached
Thank you for being here.
Glad to. I've got a reason to be here, which I'm about to address. So I've got one of the incentive bills as a sponsor because the jobs to be created would likely be occurring in District 19. I guess with a motion to defer on this particular bill, I think we now have a clear letter from the lead sponsor about outlining his position. I guess, for Councilman, this might be a sort of a question back to Councilman Mendez, but I guess I would hope maybe for either the chair or folks working on this bill that are on this committee that there is an expectation that more work would be done. Deferral just for the sake of deferral doesn't necessarily seem to me to be doing much good. My hope would be that this is a deferral so that there is more work to be done, and I would absolutely invite either the sponsor or Councilman Mendez or Mr. Wiltshire to be able to speak to the work remaining to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll let the sponsor speak to that. Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just reiterate, one, I wanted to say I think we got a little off track, and I hope I didn't help with that. At the beginning, obviously, I was focused on the amendment, but I think we're focusing on that rescission a little too much. I mean, again, the hope is this is all about getting that information up front. It's all about that simplicity, that report card. We have a little more information up front. We're attempting to get these companies just thinking about these things when they're applying for the grants. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do. And we're just kind of hung up on little things that I don't think are ever even going to happen. And if, all these what ifs about rescission and that sort of thing. So I tried to do my best to make sure, one, we weren't changing the process with pilots, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, that sort of thing. So I know with the jobs grants, it is, that is in there. But I think, again, we're just trying to get the basic information up front and, get the answers to these questions that every time we've done these, I know, my co-sponsors, Council Lady Gilmore and I, we've always stood up and said, man, we really just, we want this information, or, what's going to happen with these jobs? This one's coming in with a building. What about those jobs? That's the real workforce in this town. They're building this building. So if they're coming for the handout, if they're coming to us for the incentive, we just want to know, and it makes them think about it on the front end. So that's what we're trying to do. And I just ask that we continue to move forward tonight. And I think my amendment answers everything that I'm able to answer.
Thank you, Councilman. Can you speak to the deferral? Will any additional work be done on the actual bill? I believe that was Councilman O'Connell's question.
I would like to keep moving forward. If I didn't hear much that I felt like I could fix, so I was just thinking I would continue to move forward. And I like how what I've summed up in the amendment tonight is how I'd like to move forward.
The amendment was the work. Thank you,
Yes.
Councilman. There's a motion on the floor for deferral. Councilman Glover.
I'm going to speak on the deferral. Mr. Wilshire, is there other work that can be done in this to help clean this up to a degree? If you don't think it is, then I won't vote for the deferral. I wonder if there is additional work that can be done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Wilshire.
I think a lot of work has been put into this. I understand the position that Councilman Davis has. I think there can always be work done to improve any bill ever, but I would say a tremendous amount of work has already been put into this, and I'm not sure. I'll say frankly, I think Councilman Davis is very clear on the positions that he's laid out. He's already made some significant compromises to concerns that he's heard from other parties. He may make other compromises in the future, but I think this is the bill.
All right, so Mr. Jameson, let me just make sure I understand, because I came up and asked you a question, sidebar. If we read this back through, if we go through the amendment, we go through all the stuff, this can be amended on third if we so choose. So if something gives us heartburn when we leave here, we can amend this on third reading.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Mendez on the deferral.
Since the sponsor and the administration say the bill is the bill, I will draw the motion to defer.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Davis.
I would just move the bill as amended. Is that what you're asking for?
We're back on the bill as amended. Councilman Roten. All in favor? Opposed? Oh, we need a show of hands. There's been a roll call. All in favor?
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I count 11, and depending on how you 12. Okay. All opposed?
All opposed? Raise them high.
To 2 approved.
Bill passes as amended. Okay, now we can take up our agenda. We're on resolutions. If there's not any objection, I would like to take RS 2017, 779, and 780 together. Seeing no objections, we're on resolutions. Seeing no objections, RS 2017-779, sponsor Elrod, amends ordinance number BL 2016-235 to increase permit fees for closures in the right-of-way permit high-impact area. RS 2017-780, sponsor Elrod, amends ordinance number BL 2016-235 to create a fee for a right-of-way site management plan permit. There's a request from the sponsor to defer to second meeting in March. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Resolutions are deferred to second meeting in March. RS 2017-781, sponsors Elrod, requested all fee revenue from right-of-way temporary closure permits be used for staffing expenses and other direct costs of administering such permits. There is a request from the sponsor to defer to second meeting in March. There's a motion. It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Resolution is deferred to second meeting in March. Resolution 2017-986, sponsors O'Connell and Vercher, authorizes an economic community development incentive grant to be made to the Industrial Development Board for the benefit of Phillips Holding USA Incorporated. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Councilman Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. Two-part question. The first for Matt. We had, you were kindly pointing out earlier that this may be this rare case where we know what the state subsidy commitment would be for Phillips because of their meeting earlier today. Can I ask that question, and what was it?
Mr. Wiltshire.
The total of the state grant, I believe, is 11, and the company should correct me if I get this wrong, $11.6 million in two different components. There's a fast-track economic development grant that the State Funding Board considered today, and then there was a separate, I think, jobs training grant.
And the two components, is that based on time or employment? What are the two components? And there's that 11.6 million over what time?
You know, I don't know the details of the agreement. I'm not sure if the company's prepared to discuss that here today. There's a state grant, but my understanding is it's a grant based on employment, and I don't know the details over sort of what period of time.
Okay, thank you. I would like to make a motion to defer this incentive grant, perhaps until the second meeting in June, to see if we have any money for the following points. One is clearly they've done very well by getting an $11 million grant already, and our grant amount would be completely superfluous. Two, how do you give a $500 incentive with 2.5% unemployment here in Metro? Three, this incentive is less than 0.75% of the payroll and occupancy costs for Phillips, so it is clearly not material. Three, our best incentive may be our tax rate, and give us credit for that here in Nashville and having a very low tax rate, and let's work to protect it. And then finally, I have a real question as to how is it that these companies get the incentives? And there are lots of companies creating jobs in Nashville that are not getting incentives. This company is. Do we only fundamentally give incentives to companies with public relations departments? And in fact, are we as Metro being farmed, so to speak, by hardworking and extremely able public relations departments? But again, I would urge a deferral for the body. Thank you.
Is that a motion, Councilman?
It is.
There is a motion on the floor for deferral. Is there a second? The motion fails for lack of a second. Councilman Davis. Scott Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am not on this committee. With a heavy heart and with a tired mind and soul right now, I rise in support of the Phillips Company. And I will give you 3 reasons why we need to support this. Number one, they are already doing business with minority companies here in Nashville. Now, they're doing things that they're supposed to be doing anyway, but we've given subsidies and rewards to companies that come in to say they're going to do it, and then they don't do any business at all with the minority businesses. They don't reach out to the Urban League or NAACP or any of those organizations. Now, I, for one, am tired of giving these companies a free ride. We have been a cheap date to a lot of these companies. But right now, before they have asked us to the prom, they have already came in giving flowers and doing business in our communities. And Phillips has offered $60,000 jobs. This is not like their warehouse or other facilities in other surrounding parts of Middle Tennessee. These jobs are entry level at $60,000. There's going to be some more talks. They have made commitments to the Urban League. They are doing business with minority publications, the El Crucero, the Nashville Pride, Tennessee Tribune, and they are coming and asking to help those. Now, I know we have a low unemployment in majority of our communities, but in the African American and Hispanic community, that unemployment is high. Now, once again, Mr. Cooper, I understand you are a smart man. I get what you're saying, and I am too. You know, why are we giving all these incentive deals here? But this is the one company that's coming in and putting their money where their mouth is, that we want to be a part of this. And I urge you to please support them. And if they do not continue to what they're doing, Phillips is a nationally traded company. And locally, we have a commitment, not just locally, but nationally, the NNPA to the Urban League, to support them. If they don't do what they're supposed to do, you know, public perception and PR could be damaging to a large company. But I tell you, please support them. And Madam Chair, thank you for entertaining me.
Thank you, Councilman. Vice Chair Schulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. One is to make sure I understand what the overall value of the incentive grant would be, assuming that it's approved and it's a 7-year deal. Can somebody give me kind of the overall amount, the actual amount it would be?
Is that Mr. Hughes or Mr. Wiltshire? Which one are you going to take the question? Flip a coin? You're
Hello.
on.
It is $500 per job, 815 jobs. Times 7 years. 2.18, 2.8 entirely.
All right, so we just take the $500 per job, 815 jobs, multiplied by 7 years, and that's the amount. That would be the overall amount of the incentive grant.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Second question is, just for the record, in terms of transparency, I'm looking at section 2.210.020, talks about the amount of incentive grants. Actual amount and duration of the grant is to be determined taking into account, one, the number of jobs created. It was the number 2 that I was most concerned about, the amount of revenue anticipated to be received by Metro as a result of the location and operation of the company, and then 3 other economic community development opportunities. Could you give me an idea of what number 2 is?
Mr. Wiltshire?
So as we're evaluating each of these transactions, we look at the anticipated revenue to be generated by Metro based upon a variety of factors, both direct income received by Metro from anticipated spending by the employees, and then obviously the property taxes generated by the company and its location. Now, they're moving into, on a temporary basis, in existing buildings. There wouldn't be a net increase in property taxes for that, but it is expected that, presuming that the company approves these incentives, the company will be moving into a new location, which would increase the property tax base of the city. So those are direct revenues directly from this. And then there's a whole variety of, because there are going to be 815 employees, some of those folks will be buying new homes, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's an economic model in terms of the revenue generated, we believe is well in excess of $500 per incremental employee.
Okay, and the last question would be the economic model. I mean, is there a model that we use in terms of determining that? Obviously, 815 new jobs, people in Davidson County, people who come in, buy homes, so forth. Is there a typical example of trying to figure out exactly how much that is?
Yeah, I mean, I should, so yes is the short answer. There's some economic analyses that we perform on each of these transactions that involve the average wage of the jobs and the number of jobs, but there are a variety of assumptions that we make, including, percentage of employees who are Davidson County residents versus those who aren't. There are costs associated with Davidson County residents. Obviously, if they live here, then we're getting some property taxes off of their residence, but we have incremental school costs for those portion of the employees who have children, and so there's a sort of, I would say it is a order of magnitude economic analysis on the return for the city on an investment like this.
Okay, I guess, and I don't want to hold up this any further, and I understand the nature of this incentive grant, but that economic analysis, that always gets me. And I would love to sit down sometime and talk to you about it and figure out the formula that we use, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. Councilman Schulman, thank you, because I think that's a legitimate question. That's what I was asking Mr. Wilshire earlier. So as I listened to the debate on the floor with regards to 983, and I'm going to support this bill because I believe we keep bringing jobs into Nashville. It's good for us overall. But I think the overall community is very confused right now. We're talking about shutting down a hospital because we say we can't afford this or we can't afford that, but yet we're about to give an incentive to a corporation coming to Nashville. I think we need to be very serious and very deliberate on how we approach these things, because the average person doesn't understand how maybe all these pieces fit together. Now, Mr. Wilshire, I'm not going to put you on the line, but I will say this. I kind of run it at 35 cents a day we make on sales tax off the individuals. That's a little over $74,000 per year. 74,125, I think, is the number I actually came up with. So we more than double our money as far as the incentive is concerned without property tax, without anything else. And that's if only we gain 35 cents per day in sales tax revenue 5 days a week, not including Saturday and Sunday. So I'm going to support this, but I really hope as we go forward, we can explain to the public why we're thinking about doing some of the things we're doing to those who are less fortunate in our community. And we can also explain to those in our community who are fortunate that pay property taxes and say, look, we may put you at risk for having to pay a lot more taxes. So I'm going to support this. But I really hope, Chair, that we can continue this conversation and understand exactly what the economic impact is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilman. Councilor Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair Vercher. So I'm glad that Councilmember Glover actually brought up that question, because that's what I wanted to know. How do we determine, Mr. Wilshire, because we're saying that the hospital doesn't have enough money, but if we do this for 7 years at $400,000, it adds up to a couple of millions. Is this coming out of a different pot of money? How do we determine how many incentives we give out each year? And can you tell us how many we gave out for the 2016, 2017 year?
Sure. First, I'll just note this bill would not have a budgetary impact until fiscal year 2020. As this body knows, the way these job deals work, the company alerts us by December 15th of a given year when they want to start it, and they measure their employment as of December 31st of each year, and then they alert the finance director so she can put it into the budget, and then this council has to consider each one. And so the company has said that they are not starting it as of December 31 of 2017. So at the earliest, it would be December 31, 2018 would be the first measurement date, which means it would be included in the fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20 budget. So in terms of budgetary impact, that's the earliest that this would have a budgetary impact. The company's expecting to have about 450 employees at the end of calendar year 18. So it would have, at that point, an estimated $200,000 economic impact, $260,000 $107,000 economic impact on the fiscal year 2020 budget. To your question about how we determine how many of these, we believe we make money on every one of these deals. Every one that we've done, that's a criteria for us to do it. We believe, and Councilman Glover was talking about his economic analysis, we can talk about this. We make more in revenue from each one of these deals than we give up in revenue. And so we believe we're actually adding to the city's budget. A few macro numbers on that. The city's budget, as you know, increased by about $120 million each year for the last couple of years without a property tax increase. Now, clearly that's not just because of Parallon, Sarah Cannon, or Bridgestone, or the other deals that we've done, but we do believe that they've contributed to a positive economic environment that's had a substantial return to the city. And so that's not to say we would do any deal or every deal, but deals that generate positive economic return for the city, we believe contribute to the overall growth of the city and contribute revenues to fund things like healthcare and other sorts of things for the city's residents.
Okay, so my question was, how much in terms of dollars amount have we given out in incentives for the 2016-2017 year?
I'm sorry, you did ask that question. Yeah. I believe the only job grant that was in place for fiscal year 17 was UBS. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I have that information. I will get it to you. I think it was about 800 employees, so about $400,000 is the only one. Now, for the fiscal year.
We did one for HCA too.
Correct, and that has now, they provided notice.
Okay.
So that one will start for fiscal year 19, and that was about 1,000 employees. So it'd be $500,000. And I'm sorry, Dell has been in place since 1999. That's about 1,500 employees, so about $750,000.
Okay, so maybe we can just have a total for that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And I would like to just put forth to the chair, if we could have, I think it'd be a good measurement to see how many incentives we give out over the totality so we can look at it. Because when we do them and I understand how this works, and I think there's no argument that Nashville's a red-hot city. Mr. Wilshire has done a great job. But what the concern is that we have forgotten about a population in this city. There's no doubt that we're red-hot. I mean, we can see that, buildings going up, cranes everywhere. But the concern is when it comes for persons that we would consider maybe not to make a large contribution because of their resources when it comes to a company, that there's no value assigned to that. So in other words, there are some people in this community, when we think about resources, they may not be allocated to them because we don't think that it's a multiplier like it may be for a Parallon or HCA or something of that nature. So I do think we need to see in the long term, and I do think we need to decide as a city, comes back to the hospital, where we're gonna put our money. And what's of value? Because we know it's a great city. We can see that, but there's a population that's being left behind. And if we're saying that that's important, I think we have to take that into account too and put our money where our mouth is. And I think that this council, everybody on this council has supported every incentive package. So there's no doubt there. So there can be no F's in that. But I do think we need to be concerned about those persons that may not be considered to give a big multiplier, but yet they work every day. They send our kids to the schools here, and they contribute to our sales tax. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Lady Gilmore. To move us along, committee members are going to receive precedence. So council members, it's not that I'm ignoring you. We just have to get through our agenda, and we're running just a tad bit behind. And you know I'm a stickler for time. So there's a motion on the floor for approval. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? 13 to 1. Motion passes. RS 2017-987, sponsors Leonardo, Virtue, and others, authorizes the Director of Public Property to exercise option agreements for the purchase of various flood-prone properties for Metro Water Services. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. RS 2017-988, sponsors Virture, authorizes the Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Efren Montez de Oca against Metro Government in the amount of $8,700. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. RS 2017-989, sponsors Virture, authorizes the Metro Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury damage claim of Carol Slate against Metro Government in the amount of $125,000. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? You have discussion on 989, Council Lady Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Vircher. I just had a question about this one. I was reading the analysis. Law Director Cooper, can you speak to when we do have a injury like this that is sidewalk related, what kind of the threshold is as far as if the government has been duly informed about the problem and the time frame to repair it and so forth, and why we felt that we should settle this one? Can you just speak to that?
Sure. There are two ways that Metro can have notice of a defective condition, actual notice and constructive notice. In this case, there's an argument that we had both.
Okay.
The owner of the International Market claims that she called Public Works, I want to say 4 months before this accident, to report this condition. Public Works does not have any record of that call, but we do have, this owner will testify that she did notify Metro. In addition, because of the condition of the sidewalk, it would take quite a time for it to get in that poor condition. So the courts have determined that if it takes a long time for something to happen, then the government should have known about it. So in this case, we think we would be found to had both actual and constructive notice.
Okay, and I see that Public Works records reflect a telephone service request in 2009, but, okay, so that was solely for the roadway.
The road, correct.
Okay. And so I would ask, just subsequent to that time, I think from a systematization standpoint, as far as our new hub and the way Public Works takes in those service requests, do you feel that we're moving to a place where we have more kind of clear documentation?
Yes, yes. I think the hub will make a big difference in having notice of these type issues and being able to fix them quickly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. RS 2017-990, sponsors Syracuse, Withers, and others, accepts the Transportation Alternatives Program grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation to Metro Parks to provide funding for the construction of a multimodal path and elevated boardwalk from the Cumberland River pedestrian bridge to the Opry Mills complex. There is a letter of approval from the sponsor. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. RS 2017-991, sponsors Virture and Gilmore, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Metro Board of Health to provide HIV, STD, viral hepatitis prevention services for the management and reporting of communicable diseases. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. RS 2017-992, sponsors Virture and Gilmore, approves an amendment to a grant from the Tennessee Department of Health to the Metro Board of Health to promote the control and surveillance of the mosquito-borne diseases such as West Nile and Zika virus transmission in Tennessee. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. RS 2017-993, sponsor Vircher and Withers, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development to the Nashville Career Advancement Center to establish programs to prepare adult service recipients for employment. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. RS 2017-994, sponsors Vircher and Withers, approves a grant from the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development to the Nashville Career Advancement Center to establish career services for eligible adults, youth, and dislocated workers with barriers. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. RS 2017-995, sponsors Vircher and Withers, approves Amendment 1 to a grant from the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development to the Nashville Career Advancement Center to administer programs and services. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Now we're back on bills on second reading. BL 2017-984, sponsors Hager, Elrod, and Vircher, amends the Metro Code to increase towing and recovery rates. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing no, got some discussion. Council Lady Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair Vircher. I had a quick question. I was looking through the fees. I couldn't really tell what the difference was between the total cost and fees before and after because they were so broken out. If Attorney Jameson could speak to that, how much were they before, prior to this new bill, if it's to take effect?
I have the breakdown for them individually. I have not calculated the total difference, but most of them go up by an average of $20 to $30 for a variety of fees, and there, I should point out, an amendment to 7 of the fees.
And also, I wanted to see what prompted this legislation.
The fees have not been adjusted, at least in the past 5 to 7 years, and the towing and record services submitted to the Transportation Licensing Commission that their administrative costs and implementation costs have gone up exponentially, but with no translated increase in fees.
And this is for all towing companies?
Correct, that participate under the Transportation Licensing Commission that are authorized by them.
Okay, and then I guess my other question, I was trying to understand the flat fee. Maybe somebody could explain that to me. It seems like there's a flat fee if the car stays on the lot per day versus another fee. If someone could just explain that.
Right, they used to have a $25 if it was going to exceed a certain number of days, and now they've just made it, I think it's $35, a flat fee on the front end, rather than just this incremental change on a daily basis.
Okay, and then I guess my other question too, I know sometimes people have, like they didn't realize that their car had been towed. It might not have even been in a place that it need not be due to no fault of their own, but they've still had to pay fees. Do we have any kind of recourse to address that for persons to no fault of their own? They're say your car it comes up, is towed, and you don't even know where it is. Are you still charged this daily fee? You're looking for your car. That happens to people quite a bit. Do we address that, or they still have to pay that fee?
As far as I know, I don't want to call him out, but Mr. Fields from the TLC is here.
Yeah, maybe if he could come and address that. I know that happens to people a lot, or sometimes person's cars are being towed and the company will go ahead and tow it anyway while they're there, or make them pay an extra fee, or say they can only pay cash or something of that nature. We just want to make sure that we're protecting our citizens. If you could address those questions, Mr. Fields.
Yes, ma'am. If a vehicle is towed, and before that car can be towed, they have to get a control number, which means they call the police department, and then they have to inform the police of exactly what vehicle it is, give them all the information. So if somebody's car is towed, a citizen would call the police department. The police department would be able to tell them where it is. If there's not adequate, in other words, if it's off the street, sometimes there's street signage that's going to say that, but typically, if it's done correctly, there has to be a control number. If there's not a control number taken, then at that point, we're going to deal with it at the commission level and call the company and say, you didn't do it properly, and they may also be disciplined, but we're not going to allow them to not be compliant with their own rules. So what it amounts to is, if a car is towed, a person should be able to find it if they call the police. If they don't call the police, then, what will happen, sometimes you'll call and say, my car's been stolen. The police are going to know that, no, it's towing lot A or towing lot B.
And do all tow companies have the same fees?
The fees that we're talking about here are actually just the fees that the emergency companies and the non-consent towing companies would be using. The emergency companies are the ones that operate the zones that the police use. A non-consent wrecker company is one that would tow a car off of private property at the request of the owner of the property. This is the only fees. This doesn't affect, if my car is broken down in the parking lot, I'd call whoever wanted to call. This does not affect that at all. These are only the fees related to emergency and non-consent towing.
All right, thank you so much for explaining that.
Thank you, Council Lady. My understanding that there's an amendment for this bill. Can I get a motion to move the amendment? Mr. Jamison, would you discuss the amendment?
There are 7 fees in the original version miscalculated by a rate anywhere from $20 to $30 each. For example, the fee that was originally set at $135 is now $155. Those are laid out in the amendments package at $984. There are 7 such fees.
Are you getting it, Councilman Pridemore? Councilman Pridemore.
Thank you, Chair. Also, I want to ask, most of the increases, from what I've determined, is in the commercial end on it, the commercial trucking industry or commercial vehicles, the ones that require the big all day, all night costs, yeah. So, I mean, that's true, correct? Correct. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, all in favor? Opposed? Amendment passes. Now we're on the bill as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Bill passes as amended. BL 2017-1006 sponsors Dow, Virtue, and others, authorizes the Director of Public Property Administration to accept a donation of property located at the intersection of Blue Hole Road and Bell Road for the use as part of the park systems. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. No discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Bill passes. If there's no objection, I would like to take BL 2017-1008, 1009, and 1010 all together. These are drainage easements. Is there any objection? Seeing none, I'll read the captions. BL 2017-1008 sponsors Freeman, Virtue, and others, authorizes the acquisition of certain right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for purposes of the Hartford Drive sidewalk improvements. BL 2017-1009 sponsor Murphy, Virtue, and others, authorizes the acquisition of certain right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for the purposes of the 37th Avenue North sidewalk improvements. BL 2017-1010 sponsors Johnson, Karen Johnson, Virtue, and others, authorizes the acquisition of certain right-of-way easements, drainage easements, temporary construction easements, and property rights for purposes of the Edgeo Lake Drive sidewalk improvements. Is there a motion? It's been moved and properly seconded. Seeing Council Lady Gilmore.
Yes, thank you. I had a quick question. I was looking at the fiscal, like the note at the bottom of the page. It says the price will be paid for the easements and property rights, but it has not yet been determined, but it will come out of FY17. How does that work?
So what Public Works typically does is it's far easier for them to do these collectively, do multiple versions at the same time, and they won't have the breakdown of how those costs play out for each improvement project until later. So they get the authorization up front.
So do we get a total cost?
They do eventually submit that to us per project.
So when do we get that?
I'm looking to them. I don't yet know, but I will have that for you first thing in the morning.
Okay, and it's just a question. Just wanted to know when we get it. All right, thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Also, before we adjourn, I want to remind the committee members we do have a CIB meeting this Thursday at 4 o'clock. So make sure this is on your calendar. Councilman Glover. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. Just would like to reiterate with regards to General Hospital and some of the things that we talked about last Wednesday, because several of the members may not have been here at that point, is that I had asked you to consider putting together a group to talk about General, et cetera, as we go forward. I hope that's still being entertained, number one. Number two, if that is being entertained, I would like for you, perhaps after the first of the year, to give us an idea of what your thoughts are on that. That way it gives you a few more weeks to talk about or think about where we're going with it. But I would appreciate your consideration on that.
Okay. Councilman Glover, absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Also want to announce that the Rules Committee will stay here in the chamber after the Planning Commission meeting also. And another reminder that this Thursday at 4 o'clock, we will have our CIB meeting. We'll explore formulating a committee so we can delve into the issues as it relates to General Hospital after the first of the year. And that concludes our Budget and Finance meeting. We're adjourned.